Hi, and welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place for creatives like you to learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. There's this myth that creativity is the sole domain of the artsy folks, but that's all it is, a myth. Your brain is extremely complex, so think of it as a multifaceted gem with each facet hiding a unique artistic superpower. Now, I'm no neuroscientist, but I know one, and I'm feeling she might agree that creativity isn't confined to just a select few people. It's a force that resides within all of us, just waiting to be stirred. And our brains are the epicenters of our creativity. They're more than just gray matter. They're intricate highways of neurons and synapses, and inside this web is where the magic of inspiration, innovation, and artistic expression takes place. If creativity is the ability to generate novel and valuable ideas or solutions or products that are original, adaptive, and relevant within a specific context, which it literally and technically is, it becomes readily apparent that everyone is a creative. We just use diverse and unique modalities that are adapted to our field of expertise. A painter uses paintbrushes while an author uses words and stories, but what about scientists and mathematicians or even business people? Well, inventors solve real-world problems, scientists ask and answer questions to make discoveries, and mathematicians create algorithms to interpret data. A marketing professional has to think outside the box to capture and keep an audience's attention. The list could go on of how different people in different arenas utilize creativity, and if you look closely, there are threads tying many of them together. The impact of collective creativity is massive. It's the source of solutions to the world's most pressing problems and the heart of artistic movements and the spark behind technological breakthroughs. It's the genesis of everything remarkable that's ever graced our existence. Today's guest, as Dr. Jaya Viswanathan, is a neuroscientist and educator who also happens to have a passion for art and has made her goal to create resources that simplify the complex and fascinating world of the brain. In her book, Baby Senses, Jaya presents concepts of sensory systems found throughout the animal kingdom that have allowed different species to adapt and thrive over time. Along with the easy-to-read material, her art is eye-catching and beautiful. And I'm so excited that she's here today to talk about two of my favorite topics, art and the brain. So, without further delay, I'd like to welcome Jaya to the show. So, welcome.
Wow, Jennifer, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And I have to say, it is truly, truly my honor to be here. I am so excited to be part of the movement that you're creating, a movement of inspiration, of connection and community. And it's just so exciting for a lab person like me. A lot of the things I do in my life are all very isolating. So it is such an honor and such a privilege to be able to connect with someone like you and your movement, and through you to your listeners, and hopefully shed some insight on what you were talking about in your amazing intro, which is a lot of thinking outside the box and maybe tapping into a multi-sensorial way of seeing the world around us as well as interacting with it. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah, thank you for being here. So, and honestly, like I'm serious when I say art and the brain are two of my favorite things. You know, my background is psychology, and so I see the effects of the physical structure that you study, right? Like I see
Absolutely.
what the physical structure does in people, and so I love how we have this connection already. And I'm super excited to just be able to, and then we have the art concept on top of all of that. And so I'm super excited. But before we jump into that, let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us about your journey into neuroscience and then into art.
Absolutely. And it's a crazy story because I am very nerdy, in case you couldn't tell that already. And I have been interested in, actually from a psychology point of view, around the age of 13, 14. There's this, actually a little bit earlier, but I think that's when it crystallized for me. There's this whole concept of theory of mind, which you're probably familiar with. But for those of you who might be unfamiliar, it's the idea of recognizing or starting to recognize that what's happening in your thought processes in your brain is different from those thought processes and logic and reasoning that's happening in your neighbor or your friend. So the idea of even framing that sentence, I think that she was thinking. Like those kinds of complex structures start arising around the age of 8, 9, 10. And then at one point, I was in the schoolyard, and for me, it was just I am a logical person, and I just couldn't wrap my head around why person A was behaving so differently in the yard compared to person B. So for me, the interest, like you, I think, like a lot of people who get into neuroscience and psychology, it's just the fascination with human behavior and the diversity of human behaviors, and some of which range from the most altruistic to the most bizarre. So anyway, so I got interested, but then I have this tendency to be very mathematical. So I was more interested in trying to understand the mechanisms of what's happening in this quote unquote black box. So how does information, which is mostly in our physical world, physical stimuli such as heat, cold, light, photons of light of different color, frequencies of sound waves, all of those things, how do they then get transformed into meaningful vignettes in our brains? Things like, oh, that's my mother's voice, that's my child's voice, going from mere frequencies that are entering your ear, right? So I was, for a lot of my career, I've been studying visual and auditory sensory perceptions, and then how those result in effective behavior. So how do we take that information and then know to go open the door because someone's knocking, and not go to your phone if someone's knocking the door, right? So like you have a repertoire of possible behaviors, and then you pick from those. So that was a lot of my research. Now, to backtrack a little bit, when I was doing my my grad studies, I did my PhD in France. So once in a while, I've always been this kind of person. This is a personal note. I like to try new things once in a while, just to shake things up, to push myself outside of my comfort zone. I think we all, at least I do, tend to get into like a zone where I'm comfortable, and then I'm like, no, I need to challenge myself and do something different. And so I was living in the south of France at the time, and I was like, I should try art, because all the greats who ever lived around that area got inspired to do art. So I figured if I ever get into art, this is the moment. So I just dropped in on an art class thinking it would be a one-time thing. And then I ended up actually doing a sculpture. And at the end of those 2 hours, I knew I was going to do this for the rest of my life. And so it was one of those things which I think, coming back to your intro a little bit, and I apologize if I'm going on too long, by the way, but to tie it back into your intro, it was a way for me, which I had never done before, connect with a more intuitive intelligence in me, what's known as instinct, and detach a little bit from the overtly cerebral logical processes, which perhaps up until that point I had been overly connected to and underconnected to the instinctual part of myself and my brain. And so that balance was somehow reset during the first session I ever did of my art class. And then I never looked back. And the fascinating thing is, and this is the last thing I'll say before we can dig more, is that I really, really see myself as having become a better scientist as an artist, and being a better artist as a scientist. And somehow the two have somehow, the sum is greater, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And somehow the fact that I've been able to tap into these two sides of myself has made me a richer person as a whole.
That's amazing. So as a kid, you weren't the kind of kid who just went around wanting to do arts and crafts or anything like that? Like that wasn't something you did?
No, not at all. In fact, I think most of my time was in a library. I will say I really liked dance and music. So but that was more like, it was more about just kind of shaking it out, like more than like expressing or creating anything. But most of my time I was head in a book, reading something, reading textbooks, reading fiction, science fiction, all of it. But I was not the kid who was like going through coloring sets. No.
That's wild. And so I love that. I love to see that adults, they find a passion and they're like, oh, and then it just unlocks a whole different world. Because, as kids, you're just expected. Like I look at my kid, when she's about to be 14, but when she was a lot smaller, like, she always wanted to color. She always wanted to draw. It was always something she wanted to do. And you just assume that kids love it. I wasn't that kid either. However, I was the kid who was always making something. It wasn't coloring. I hated color. I still don't like to color. Like I'm not good at it. It was never something that I wanted to do. But I remember one time, I have a younger sister and it was summer break and we were outside playing and we came across these 2x4 boards that had been broken up. And so they were probably, I don't know, they were probably a foot long each. And I was like, oh, we could make something with these. And we were like, let's figure it out. So, we found nails in the shed and we found paint in the shed. And so we started nailing them together and painting. We just had to do something. We wanted to create something. And we were like, look, we got a picture frame. And of course it was like a 20-pound picture frame that was ugly as all get out. And so my mom was like, or you made a plant holder for my potted plant. Isn't that great? So, we were constantly wanting to make stuff and do stuff. But I never really got into arts and crafts as an adult. So I just kind of lost that part of me. But I've always liked writing. And so, there's always that passion somewhere deep inside. You just have to unlock it. But I didn't start writing professionally until I was an adult just a few years ago. So I just love seeing that happen.
Yeah. And isn't that fascinating? I feel like some of the things that you learn or do kind of help you later in life too. Like, I'd imagine like your passion for making and building stuff, if you one day end up deciding to do some engineering projects, that kind of early exposure to that kind of thinking will probably be helpful.
Oh, sure. And it all goes into being able to use your imagination. Like we thought we had built the best picture frame in the world. In our minds, it was perfect. It was great, but that's not what it was. Also, I really like what you were saying about having the right brain and the left brain all of a sudden meet each other and be like, a whole new world. Like it was a whole brand new experience for you because it does that for you. They're meant to work together.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm going to take a segue because you talked about left brain and right brain. I was more thinking of things that are even a little bit more primitive, like brainstem or like gut brain axis, to like kind of like go get a little bit more, because when you're working that physical as a creative, like you really turn off your brain and you let your hands take over, and whatever you're feeling in your gut kind of ends up being what the object is in front of you. But speaking of left brain, right brain, just a fascinating anecdote. There have been some really cool studies in corpus callosectomy patients, so people who've had a severance of the left and right brain due to an accident or something. And it's literally like there are two people living in one body. So there have been like case studies where they'll reach simultaneously in the morning for two different shirts, right? Because the left is usually connected by the right hemisphere and vice versa. And they don't talk, they literally stop talking to each other. So you're right, like they are meant to work together when everything is going great, but a lot of us don't always consciously tap into both sides or multiple sides. I don't even think there are two sides, like multiple sides of our capacity to learn and grow and be the amazing people that we are.
Oh, yeah. And I think that, learning in general, you use so many different parts of your brain. It's not just a logic and not just a creative part. My daughter she's like a kinesthetic learner. She has to be physically doing something while she's learning. And it drove me crazy because we homeschool. And so it drove me crazy when she was in kindergarten, first, second grade, before I really understood. I was like, babe, you're not paying attention. Sweetheart, you're not paying attention. You're over here playing with Legos. but she had perfect recall. She could tell me exactly what I had said almost verbatim because her brain is like wild. But if she was sitting there like with her hands still or just a pencil in her hands, she couldn't pay attention she couldn't remember anything I said because her brain was working so hard to not think about doing something, And so I think that it's fantastic to be able to bring in the creative side or an art or whatever it is and allow kids to learn the best way they know how. And I think that's a whole other conversation. We can have it now or we can have it later. But I mean, I'm all about let's do something for education here too.
Absolutely. And, I could not agree more. And learning is absolutely multimodal. A lot of learning in schools have taken that out. That multimodality is out. And then the kids who succeed are more often than not the ones who are able to sit still. Not because they're actually like academically brilliant or not. Nothing against kids who can sit still and listen. Right. That's wonderful. But I think learning is so much more. It's the nuances of the person teaching you, their voice cadence. It's their enthusiasm. So more often, like if you think back to the subjects you enjoyed the most, it was because your teacher was cracking jokes or let you move around and go out and touch stuff in the yard or something. Like there was more than one thing to the learning that drew you to that topic. So I could not agree more, and I'm happy to talk more about that as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's always been something that teaching has always been a thing that I've done. I was a high school psychology teacher for a while, and you do have to figure out what works for the kids, and that's something that I think we're trying to cookie cutter education and say, like you said, if you can sit still, then you'll succeed. But here's the thing, like I have now learned my kid needs her headphones on and one ear has music playing in it while her teacher's in the other, or she needs a fidget spinner, or she needs Legos. Like it overwhelms my brain. I can't focus if there's music playing because I want to sing or I want to dance or I want to move, whatever. Yeah. And so every brain is so different, and we can't do that in the classroom. We can't do that. But let's talk about your book. I read it. First of all, your art is adorable. Like, did you draw all of the pictures in it?
I did, yeah, all of it.
Oh my gosh, so cute! I was like, look at those little penguins. Anyway, okay. So
thank you, thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
It's amazing. And so it's called Baby Senses. And when I first heard the title, I thought it was for babies. And I was like, and you can read it to babies. Obviously, you can read it for babies. But it makes perfect sense because it's talking about, the baby animals and asking their moms and their dads, what's so special about us and that kind of thing. And it's been well received as far as I can tell by artists and neuroscientists. And I'm assuming parents love it. I loved it. So tell us about like the inspiration of the project and the goals you have for it.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So right off the bat, thank you. And thank you for reading it. I really appreciate that. I had like similar to what we were just talking about, like educational goals in mind when I wrote it. And so I really appreciate your comments. So the journey really started many years ago, again, in grad school. I've always believed that a lot of science is really in service of public good. And it's a service field, really. Sometimes people forget that, and it's seen a little bit as elitist, but at the core of it, it's really kind of trying to expand the circle or sphere of knowledge that we have as a species, right? Like so. And it always bothered me personally a little bit that somehow when the information was shared, it was only for other scientists. So most people only really ever publish their data or present them at scientific conferences. And so I've been trying to do science communication as a scientist. So there's a lot of nuance. It's kind of its own field now, because there are journalists who try to get a science background to do the job, or there are scientists like me who try to like bridge that gap, because you don't want to bog people down with technical details and bore them with jargon. But at the same time, a lot of what I've seen in the last few years is conflation of results to grab the reader's attention. There's miscommunication about how science even basically works. And, if you boil it down to the basics, it's really like boring and repetitive work. So you there's an emphasis on innovation because of this newsworthiness. But in my opinion, and I know in the opinion of a lot of scientists, it's meant to be boring. It's meant to be you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again until you find reliable results that make sense and are representative of a population or whatever kind of experiment you're doing. And so kind of like to strike that balance, I've always been interested, not to get too much in the weeds about it, but I think it was important for me personally to kind of give that component back to people. So I've written opinion pieces in student run journals they have no paywall to access, so people can go and read. So for example, one of the articles I wrote was about recreational use of what's called cognitive enhancers on campus at the time I was doing my master's. And so, people were very interested in that. And then I ended up interviewing some people, and it was quite an interesting piece to work on its own.
I bet.
So, fast forward to then, I had not been doing art at the time. So it was just something I was trying to do using presentations, oral presentations, written presentations, that kind of thing. And then fast forward to when I started doing art, it took me a few years. It's again, because I got to it as an adult, I was not good at it when I started. So that's why your comment that you liked it means so much to me. I am living proof, if nothing else, I am living proof that practice really means something. Practice and passion, right?
Yes.
So it took me a few years to get good at it. And then I ended up making a couple of these neuro art painting for myself, just to hang up in my apartment. And because, that's, for me, it was bringing two things that I love together. And then I had friends over, and they were like, oh, these are great. And colleagues over, and they're like, you got to keep doing these. And then I had a little show in Washington, D.C., where I lived at the time. So I had a little show at this amazing little art studio called Clagsburn Studios, which is owned by an incredible local artist, Micheline Clagsburn. And so I had these neuro art pieces up, and the response was overwhelming. And I kind of realized that I have some material to make. So people were fascinated. They wanted more. And they were like, yeah, no, give us more. And I'm like, well, the next step for me would be to bring an educational component into it, and to bring it to children who to spark their interest. Not necessarily that, every kid who picks up the book is going to become a neuroscientist or anything like that, but there were multiple. And then to kind of close the loop to what were my goals, one of the things I really wanted to do was to introduce more subtly the concept of how science works. So now I actually listed references in a list of about, I want to say 100-ish references in the book, which is, as you would know, very highly unusual for a children's book. And then I had some people tell me, why would you do that? And some people were like, it's going to put off children. I'm like, I don't think children know to be put off by something like that. And, of the 100 or so references, I think one of them was my work, right? My PhD dissertation work. But that was to show, for example, that science is a community effort. It's group effort. One person doesn't cure Alzheimer's on their own, that's just not how science works. And people should know that, it's knowledge building over time and by various teams, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary teams, diverse teams, people of different races and genders and identities and creatives all coming together to solve a problem with unique insight all on their own. So that was one goal. Another goal that I really had when writing this book was to take the emphasis away from humans and talk about, because there's this idea that humans have evolved to have the best brains in the world. And there is some truth to that, and we can talk about that if you're interested. But I think there is there's something flawed in that logic for me, because I think all animals have evolved, especially animals, if you think about like crocodiles, right? They are apex predators that have survived for millions of years. Right. So they are as smart as they need to be to survive anything. Right? And so it's kind of like that. Like, I wanted to bring an appreciation of all the different kinds of intelligences in nature and an appreciation for the diversity and the beauty in all of them. So I kind of took the emphasis off of humans and kind of kept it in the natural world around us. There were other reasons, but I mean, of course, the obvious one I think is like brains are awesome, and so there are obvious ones, but I think I'll focus on those two now, and stop there because I can go on and on.
Listen, we can be here all night, but that's. But I love that because, one, kids love animals. Like, it's just natural. Yeah. They are curious about people to an extent, but they're around people all the time. So when you take it from the viewpoint of animals, they're like, "Ooh, that's something I didn't know." And you had made a comment about not every kid that's going to read it wants to be a scientist. That's fine. But then you use one of my favorite words, like there's, I think, bioluminescence in there or something. And I'm like, that's one of my favorite words. And so you're going to have kids that are like, ooh, words, words I don't know. And so it brings in that whole other, side of the brain that says, I may not care much about science, but I like these words. They're big and they're pretty.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, in the glossary, so the book has three parts. It has really the children's book part with all these conversations between the babies and the adults and the images and the neuroscience images. And then there's a glossary where I go into the details of each of these sensory systems. And that's exactly what I try to do in the glossary. And that can be for older kids, teenagers or middle schoolers. And so try to go into like the history of it. And, some kids might be interested in history and war. So for example, when I talk about echolocation, in the glossary, I talk about the sonar and how World War II technology sonar is based on similar principles of how whales and dolphins and bats are perceiving the world around them and mapping their world using ultrasounds. Right. And then for some others, and one of my favorites, I shouldn't say personal favorite, I don't have a favorite. But when I was doing research myself for writing the book, bees are incredibly interesting, and they're just bizarre. And I think for me, the fascination came from a neuroscientific perspective, where a lot of insects, they don't even have brains, right? They have ganglia. They're basically clusters of cells that have to do these complex computations like flying or whatnot. So a lot of the kind of theories behind that is that they're extremely stereotyped. So it's kind of like a reflex. Like if someone comes at your eye, you blink, right? So there's no thinking involved in it. So that was the kind of prevailing theory about insects in general. But then when you throw in social insects, it really throws that for a loop. So, for example, one of the most interesting things I read was when a queen bee dies and her sister takes over. Now, siblings can be genetically close or far apart. It depends. It's not like if there are three siblings, they're going to be equidistant from each other genetically. And so if the sister that takes over is less related to the hive can rebel. They can choose to rebel. So what does that mean if a hive is now choosing to rebel? And me having a vivid imagination, I'm imagining like a little Game of Thrones or like Witcher style, like all out sword fight, which is good for a laugh, but it's also like, hopefully some kids who read that are like fascinated by, what's happening there. And again, it doesn't have to be neuroscience. It can be social dynamics. It can be so many other things. And science is interconnected too. So it's not about like liking one kind of science or another. It's about sparking the interest, I think, of children to explore the natural world around them in different ways.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, I think in sixth grade, we started changing classes. So we had a different teacher for every subject, but I'm thinking like a fifth grade teacher who wants to take this book and, they teach every subject. It's all in one book. All they have to do is pick up this one book and be like, we're going to read about this. And guess what else we're learning about today? It's so amazing how interconnected it all is, and how you have pulled that. That's creativity in and of itself. How you were like, this connection real quick. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was just thanks a lot. I think it's what I enjoyed the most in the whole process was kind of building these little narratives that I was hoping people would connect to as much as I did. To those narratives, those little stories in the not just in the picture book part, but also in the glossary, right? Like learning about the narwhal's tooth, and it was another one which was like, what? Yeah, for me, I was like, what? Yeah.
I'm that kid though that would sit there and read the glossary. Like I was that kid. I was like, oh, well, where does this take me? Where does this take me? And so I'm that kid. I'm sitting there reading something, and still I click the link. I'm like, well, let's see where this goes, and it's what's connected here. And so that is for people like me.
Perfect. Perfect.
Wants the whole picture, and I see something like Baby Senses, becoming a series where the babies start getting older and becoming more curious about their environments and their abilities. So, do you have plans to write more books along these lines?
Yeah, so I have so many ideas. Sometimes I need I need to center myself, and I'm still riding the wave of this one. So I have things planned. So one of them, going back to what we were talking about earlier about making learning multimodal, I have a really good friend who's a musician, and we're actually working on, it's going to be related to the book, but different. It's not like we're turning the book into an audiobook, which is another idea I have with animal vocalizations, because you lose the art aspect. But that's going to be a more involved project, because I'll have to get permissions for the audio files and things like that. So that's on the back burner, the audiobook. But then we want to make songs for children, right? That are sing-alongs, that are about what does the narwhal's tooth do, or what does the pit organ do, or whatever. So we want to make that. So the next book, not growing up, although I love that idea, I should think about that. Maybe that's something you and I can collaborate on. I would love that. But the next idea, so this was all sensory systems. That's my background. I did a lot of sensory neuroscience work in my life, in my career. But I've also done behavior. And for me, though, human behavior is interesting, but not that interesting. Going back to but I would more be interested in explaining more ecological behaviors or biological behaviors like sleep. But then some animals do it really weird, like polar bears hibernate, and what's happening there, right? Or a lot of whales and dolphins, they are mammals, so they need to keep coming up for air. So they can't just fall asleep because they'll drown. in the water. So they actually sleep half a brain at a time. So that's an interesting behavior. Both of those are sleep, but then there's also things like seasonal migrations, and a lot of behaviors are mating behaviors that are really weird. So I've been like kind of playing around with how to do that in a children's book without like going into the mating part of it. Strictly from a scientific perspective.
Birds
But
and the bees story. Yeah, that was all.
yeah, exactly. Like how do they pollinate or whatever? But pollination, that's another really interesting behavior that animals have
Mhm.
evolved, and pollinators and symbiotic relationships and all of that. So there's a lot of interesting things that I've been playing around with, and I think there is going to be a book in the future. But like I said, I'm still riding the wave of this one. It just came out in April of this year, and so it's going to be a couple of years down the line.
Get it. I am constantly like I have books, like just a list of them at a running note on my phone that says your next book idea is this, and then one pops up, and I'm like, oh shoot, here's another book idea, and so it's never ending. I get it. The inspiration is just
Absolutely.
always there, and I'm sure the more you learn as well, as you uncover new things, you're like, I need to share this. If you're like me, you're like, oh, somebody needs to know about this. It's going to be fascinating, and so I get it. I can totally relate. So
Yeah,
let's.
so sorry not to interrupt you. I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
But one thing that I just read in one of it was a paper that was released recently. An alligator in one of the zoos or aquariums in the U.S. that's been in its own compound. It's in a solitary compound. Just laid like a clutch of eggs, and it was basically cloning itself because there were no males, and so this like became a scientific paper, and it's a process called facultative parthenogenesis, which is seen in insects, right? But it's not seen in these bigger reptiles. So it made the news. But yeah, like animals cloning themselves. That's like, oh my God, I'm like, people should know this. This is like amazing. Yeah.
Wild. And you know what? Nature is one of those things that we think we have a grasp on it, and then it throws us a curveball. We got nothing. We have no idea what we're looking at, but it's so fascinating. And the same is true for people too. Like they are fascinating, and I could watch them all day long, and they will still surprise me. You know what I mean? Okay, so let's talk about, because neuroscience and all this good stuff. Neurodiversity is a huge deal, and so when you're looking at being a creator, and especially, and I don't know. So when we were in middle school, when I was in middle school, I'll say we, I can't lump you into my age group because, I wouldn't do that. But when I was in middle school, it became more and more common for boys to be diagnosed with ADHD and that kind of thing. And then, that's, I think from my background in psychology, I think we overdiagnosed a little bit on that. It was kind of like they're boys, now looking back, I understand, little boys are very different, and we just needed a way to keep them in their seats. And that goes back to the diverse learning modalities and stuff like that. But when you're creating something like your baby senses book and that kind of thing, how do you hope to, bring in those with the varying neuro abilities, if you will?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question, and so thank you for bringing it up. So like I said, so for me, it's not going to be a standalone project, and I think that's why I would like to bring in an auditory component. And I mean, I would have loved to make it a touch book, but that's really prohibitive to publish. So just a little aside there about practical versus idealism, kind of just practicality, just crushing the dreams of idealism right there. But yeah, ideally, I would have liked it to be a tactile book that people can also touch, and like, I don't know, like the animals being cut out or the cells being raised or something. But and in multiple languages. That's another idea that I really wanted to do. But again, it's like every time you publish in a different language, you have to find a different publisher, get a translator. It just practicality crushes the dream sometimes. But I try to look at it at least the two that you can do with, I think, a children's book is audio, visual audio um, components. So one of the things I did in my revisions of my manuscript draft was read things aloud. Now I don't have children myself, but I tried to make it a little sing-songy, and then I shared it with friends who do have children, and like my beta readers or advanced readers, whatever they're called, the technical term, I apologize. But like I requested that they actually read it out loud and see if it makes sense, and if it, like, there's a cadence and rhythm to like saying them out loud. And that was important to me because when I wrote the book, I envisioned either educators or parents reading it out to their children and learning as a community. And so we talked about learning being multimodal, but a big aspect of learning is also social.
Mm-hmm.
And so if like if your dad is reading it to you, your mom is reading it to you, and they're enthusiastic about it, that's what children latch onto, especially really younger children. So babies are often, like, there've been lots of studies about this where they do eye tracking of babies, and they look at their mom's eyes and where they're looking at, and that's where they look at. So they look at their mom, and if their mom is looking left, they look left. So these kind of things are just kind of like programmed into us because we are social creatures. And one of the really interesting things that humans are the only animals with a white cornea, where you can actually see what direction people are looking at, because it is such an important social cue for us. And a lot of animals, actually looking them in the eye is threatening, other than humans. But for humans, it's such an important social cue. So anyway, I went off on a tangent there. But the idea was to have this be a social learning experience, a verbal learning experience. Again, I tried to create a balance between jargon. So there's always just one technical term per scientific sensory system. And everything else is easy language, meant to be. I mean, there's nothing wrong in growing vocabulary, but I didn't want people to feel like this is just a bunch of technical words. And that would have defeated the purpose of it being a children's book. And breaking down complex concepts into logical modules that don't have to be complex themselves. So that was the last thing that I did, was try to like break things down to their component parts. So what exactly are we doing when we process sounds, and why? Kind of like linking, I feel like, at least for me, kind of understanding why would an animal need to sense thermal imaging or need to do thermal imaging? Why would an animal want to do magnetic imaging? Why would an animal need to dive for develop these sensors in the penguin? Penguins basically need to go on these long dives because they live in the Antarctic. And food is scarce. And so a lot of the time they are feeding also their children. Their children don't dive. And so the longest recorded length dive is around 15 minutes, I think. And that's a long time to be underwater.
Yeah.
Under icy water.
Cold water, yeah.
Cold, like icy. Like I couldn't last 30 seconds. I'll be honest. I'm going to be like, nope, just nope that right out. And so, well, they need to do that because that's how they feed their children and themselves. So, well, what has their body done? Well, their bodies, so we all have something called a diving reflex, where our internal mechanisms recognize that we're underwater because that's not our natural environment to be in. Well, so the penguins have taken it a step further. So they have really advanced sensors, carotid bodies that are constantly sampling their blood for oxygen, blood gas levels, all of that. So obviously you can imagine, as the longer they are underwater, the less oxygen they're going to be in the blood, because everything's getting absorbed. And so they have a switch then. They switch to a different kind of metabolism, so they can conserve the energy enough to come back up with the food that they've caught. So obviously humans, we don't need to do that. We live on land. We don't need to go into the water to catch raw fish. And so we didn't develop those internal mechanisms and metabolic mechanisms to the extent that penguins did. So I often try to, like, in the children's book part of it, kind of link the why to the what and the how, which to me made the most, like, simple and logical sense of explaining things to kids. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because what's the first question that a kid learns? Why?
Why?
Why? Why? You know?
Yeah. So it's preemptive. Yeah,
Right.
preemptive. Yeah. This is why.
I love how we can take, as humans, we see, and you're explaining all these things that the animals do and how they adapt to their environments, to their needs and that kind of thing. And we learn from them. We're like, and we have a natural adaptation about us as well, because we've learned to adapt, over time, and to our environments and to the change of all the things that we've seen change just in the last 100 years, not to mention any further back, we can adapt probably in the last 30 years, if you really think about it. We've done a lot of adapting, and our brains have adjusted for that. But that's so much part of creativity, is learning to adapt to new environments, or to new requirements, or to new needs, whatever you see out there. And so I appreciate that you have taken it and created this little world. And I really look forward to seeing it expand, because I think there's a whole lot of potential. And I get it, like wanting to make, when you said like a touch book, I went, yes, but that's so like cost restrictive, and you have to, like, the resource alone is expensive, and not to mention the time and all of that goes into it. And an audiobook too. An audiobook can get expensive as well. But I will say that audiobooks never really crossed my mind as a need until I realized my husband has dyslexia, and he was missing out, and I was like, oh, we can get audiobooks for stuff. And to tell you, just in the last 5 years, how many books he's listened to versus the 35 years before that, it's amazing how many books he's been able to absorb. And so you don't really think about, or consume, you don't really think about that until the need is in your face. And so I'm glad you're considering that.
No, absolutely. I really want, I'm an auditory person myself. And I think during the pandemic too, a lot of people got into, like, just listening to things while they were on their Zoom calls or whatever, just multitasking. And it's just such a rich resource for learning. And just to take a little tangent, when learning a new language, actually, auditory learning is huge. Yes. And that's why people who go to a different country pick it up so much faster, because they're surrounded by the sounds of it. And our auditory systems as humans, it's not the best in the world, but it's pretty darn powerful. There are people who can speak 8-10 languages and fluently, and it's just, I think it's definitely under tapped into, and a lot of artists, right, they kind of get into a zone listening to music when they're making their art, and it makes a huge difference. So I completely agree. I think auditory learning is huge for people, and it's quite impressive. There was a study that really stunned me, where they showed that, like, after 20 years, I think, don't quote me on the number of years, but like they did MRI scans of musicians who'd been trained for X number of years compared to people who didn't have musical training, and their auditory cortex was thicker. Like their brain had actually gotten thicker in that area because they were putting it to constant use.
That's why it's like, I mean, you work out a muscle enough and it gets bigger. I mean, that's exactly what happens when you do that with your brain. Oh, that's wild. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to flip the script here, and I'm going to sit back and let you be the hostess of the show, and you get to ask questions or pick the topic, whatever you want to do.
So I have a couple of questions.
That was
so
fast.
no. It's just, you're, like I said, I am so excited to be part of your movement. And what are like some of the most like inspiring stories you've heard from your community?
Ooh, that's a good one. One of my favorites, is when I get to talk to the senior adults. I actually spoke with one yesterday. I had an interview with her yesterday. She's 85, and she started out as a stay-at-home mom who on the side wrote for newspapers, and she edited for a newspaper while she was a stay-at-home mom. And I love those kinds of stories because now she has, a dozen books under her belt, and she was a women's rights activist, and she has just all of this wisdom and knowledge that she can just drop, on top of you and make you go, keep talking, please. And that was so, I love that kind of thing. But I also love the stories where I had one guest who he had been in a massive accident and they didn't really think he was going to survive it. And they called him like a 1% miracle kind of thing. Like he walked away from it after a while in the hospital. And then he turned around and said, what am I going to do with this? I'm going to use my story to motivate other people. And I think just having people share their stories because they know that there's a place for them and that there's a need for them. Because if you have a story and you don't share it, you're doing the world a disservice, right? Because you clearly were given a story for a reason. And so just hearing stories from people in general and seeing them fulfill the purpose that they were given, like, I think that's inspiration enough, right? Like, I think I've done by Tuesday, by the 31st of this month, I will have interviewed 70 people, I think. And so because, and every single one of them, I've just been like, you were put here for a reason. Thank you for sharing.
Right. Yeah. And you, that what you said was just beautiful. People finding their purpose and fulfilling it. That's beautiful.
Oh yeah.
So because I came to art late in life, I always like asking this when I meet artists is like, what's your creative process? Because I feel like that's as creative as the art itself, is like how people find inspiration and how so that's something I wanted to ask you, like even before I knew there was a flip the script section. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Okay, so as far as artistic process is concerned, you know how you mentioned me being like this very organized podcast host and I'm very on top of things and I have a plan. That is not true for my creative process. There is no plan.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
It was very interesting and it drives me bonkers. It just makes me crazy because, I have a planner here on my desk. I have a planner here on my wall and I have a to-do list over on this side at my desk here. And so there's constantly lists running of things and it's very logical. It's very straightforward. But then I sit down to write and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, what do I do next? And so I have to walk away. I can't just sit down and say, I'm going to write right now. I have to not think about writing. And then I can write. So there's process. Isn't that crazy? I don't know.
That is, yeah.
So I don't know what the deal is. I mean, I guess I do know what the deal is. My brain is so used to being structured that when it's time to flip the switch to go into imagination mode, I'm like, ooh, I'm too structured right now. I got to take a minute. And so that's my cue to go do something not structured, walk or laundry or whatever.
Okay. That's really insightful. That's really insightful to me because it feels like you just, like what you said, your brain is switching states. Yeah,
so that's amazing. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm switching from all right, it's red light, green light situation.
I completely understand. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, absolutely. That was a good question because, I always ask people that same question. I'm like, so what's your creative process look like? What's your day to
Ah,
day that, especially people who are um, like full-time creatives,
yeah,
they
yeah,
usually have a process, which,
yeah.
good for them. I can't be a full-time creative in the sense that I can just write, imaginative words all day. I wish I could, but I can't.
Right. I completely understand that. Yeah, that too. Yeah, I mean, it would be great to be a full-time author and educator, but I have a day job. Yes.
Those day jobs get in the way. I'm just saying.
Sometimes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Would you be a full-time creator if you could? Like, would you do art all the time in some form or fashion?
I don't think so. And
You
that's
love the
that's
science
really
too
weird
much.
for me. I think, but I couldn't do science full time and no art either. Like it's become that, and creativity comes in so many different forms too. Like art is, I think that's one of the big lessons I've learned from starting to do art is that there's digital art, there's sculpture, and I try to still take classes. I'm trying to learn new things to like, there's a balance between doing what you've practiced and gotten good at versus, trying to add new skills. And sometimes they don't work for me and that's okay. But if I don't try, I'll never know. Um, and so there is a balance to that, but I couldn't imagine not doing art or doing either full time now. Like I would want to do a little bit of both. But I will say, like, one of the things I do enjoy a lot about my job now is that I do get to wear different hats, so to speak. So I do the science, I do the science communication. And that's the thing I think sometimes, to get philosophical for a second, if I may, um, I always, so when I said I wanted to become a neuroscientist at the age of 14, I really meant it. I wanted the lab, I wanted to be a professor, I wanted to, do experiments for the rest of my life, write grants, get the funding, all of that. Um, After my postdoc, I this opportunity where I currently work came along, and it came a little bit out of left field. And I had never thought about something like this. And initially, I was like, well, I'll give it a shot. And sometimes life kind of just like, at least that to me felt like that was what I was meant to do. And I was going down almost the wrong path for myself
Mhm.
because that would have been very unidirectional. I don't know if I would have written this book, I would have been too busy. And so, like it kind of brought me to a place of balance and art where I could expand what the ways in which I could grow and learn and contribute to society. So yeah, so I'm done with my little philosophical rant there,
But
but yeah,
hey, good for you for realizing that it's okay to pivot because there are
yeah,
so many people who they make it to a certain point in their life and they say, it's too late. I can't do this. Right. Like I had a conversation with a woman. She was uh, 75 years old and she didn't start writing her first book until she was about 55.
right.
And she was like, I got a later start in life, but here I am. I've written 16 books because I wasn't
Wow.
afraid to say I'm not happy as a software engineer anymore. I want to go write fiction novels. And I'm like, good for you because too many people get stuck in this. I can't change now. It's too late.
Yeah. 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 And it was interesting when it happened. Like I said, I never. So currently, to give context, I do what's called program development. So I'm a program analyst in the division of neuroscience at the National Institute on Aging as a contractor. So I'm not a federal employee. I'm a Kelly contractor. But it's really looking at it from a bigger picture. It's not,
Mhm.
I don't do, as of 2 years ago, I don't do lab research anymore. Um, but I look at the research as a whole in Alzheimer's and related dementias. And um, it, within the country, but also around the world. And it's been a lot more fulfilling for me personally. But again, some people would prefer to be in the lab. So, there's place for everyone.
Right. And you had your time, you had your experience, you got to do exactly what you wanted to do when you were 14.
Exactly.
You just took a different path when you hit a certain point. There was a fork in the road and you said it's time to make a choice, and you made a choice. And I think and you know what, even if you had continued on that path, I think you would still find yourself fulfilled and successful. But I think, when passion comes into play, you find happiness and fulfillment. And, so there's a difference.
Yeah, there really is. Yeah. And I think for me, the big thing was the sense of public service. Sometimes it's missing. And lab work is great. I love the experiments I did. But like, you're a little bit removed from at least the kind of research I was doing. I was a bit removed from patients. I was a bit removed from the people I was actually trying to help. And now I don't feel that way because I can see the numbers, and somehow it feels more tangible to me that I'm in a sphere of public service.
I love that. And what a great service to be providing, because that is it can get very depressing and sad, I am sure, because I mean, it affects a bunch of ages. I know it's mostly, the elderly and that kind of thing, but when it hits hard. And I've watched family members, deal with the Alzheimer's and dementia, and it's so sad. And my prayer is that it's not the way I go, but I can see how it would be very fulfilling work, because what a need, a need. Mm-hmm. Okay, Jaya, how can listeners connect with you and your work? Tell us about if you got a website, social media, all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I love connecting with people. But as I alluded to at the beginning of the call, so a lot of what I do is very isolating. So I write, I do art, and I do research. So all of those are like things you do by yourself a lot.
Yep.
So all connections are welcome. I do have a website. It's called babysensesbook.com. You can search for me, Jaya Viswanathan. So I'm on social media. I have Instagram, Facebook. My Twitter account is very, very new, but I'm there. I'm Jaya Neuro on Twitter. So find me on social media. I have an email as well, babysensesbook@gmail.com. And you can drop me a line through my website. So easy to get in contact, and I look forward to hearing from you all.
Oh, perfect. And I'll put all of that in the show notes. So it'll be as simple as going over there and clicking a link, and it will take you exactly where you need to go so you can get in touch with Jaya. All right. Are you ready for the big question? Have you had time to think about it? You ready for your big question?
I think so. Yeah.
Here is your big question. What is one piece of advice or encouragement you want listeners to walk away with if they hear nothing else?
Okay. So this is really like close to my heart, but I want people to remember how amazing brains are. Right? Like, your brain is amazing. Even when you're depressed, even when you're at your lowest point in life, think about what your brain is doing at any given moment and how amazingly it has helped you navigate all of the circumstances you've been in successfully to the point that you've gotten here. Whether you're neurotypical, neuroatypical, things like, so for even like small things, like I've been having a cup of tea during this call. Every time I take a sip, the weight of the cup changes. And my brain is automatically adjusting my grip size on this cup so as to not grip it too hard or drop it. So these are the kinds of things that your brain is doing at all times, even at your lowest. So take a moment when you're feeling depressed or low and acknowledge how awesome your brain is.
Yes. Oh, can I tack on to that as well?
Absolutely.
Because in all of my lovely education stuff, I'm also a professional brain health, or a brain health professional, which means that my biggest concern is the health of the brain and taking care of your brain and protecting your brain, because you only get one, right?
Absolutely.
So, make sure that you're feeding it well and not, taking it out with all of the caffeine, because guilty, that is in the coffees that you're picking up in the drive-through. And make sure that, if you are going to take risks, that you wear proper headgear. And my mother-in-law always told my husband when he was growing up, your friends don't wear helmets because their mothers don't love them. And it's terrible, but that was how she was like, you only have one brain. You have to take care of it.
Absolutely. And I will say, just related to that, I think a lot of people neglect their brains when it comes to diet. So it's something that has been really making me sad, because there's such a superficial, pardon me for saying that, superficial drive to look a certain way and look skinny or whatever. And people sometimes don't listen to what their body needs and deprive themselves of essential nutrients. So something that happens, for example, as when we don't, so our brains use about 30% of the nutrients that we put into our body for energy. And when we don't feed it, so our neurons have something called myelin around it. So think of it as fatty insulation cables that are helping it transmit messages long distance within the brain. So, for example, from the back of your eye to your visual cortex and so on. So these neurons are transmitting materials based on fat being the insulation, so things don't get scrambled. And if you don't feed yourself properly, your brain starts eating itself. And that's literally one of the risk factors for all kinds of bad aging disorders, inflammation, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, and all of that. So it's very important. As you said, I agree 100% to take care of the brain. We only get one. I love that.
Gosh, yes. That is a tangent that we could take off on and spend another hour on.
I know.
I am so that. It's one of those situations that, we blame it on, we say ADHD is just an attention deficit problem. Like, no, it's a brain issue. Or, brain fog is because I haven't slept enough. There's probably another issue under there that you just haven't taken care of. And so, yes, take care of it, because your brain is amazing. Like Jaya says, it's fantastic and amazing and wonderful, but you only get one.
Yep. I love that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You should draw a picture of a brain and be like, take care of your brain. You only get one. And I would be the first one to buy that print.
Perfect. Sounds like a plan. You got yourself a deal.
Oh, that's so good. Jaya, thank you so much for being here and hanging out. I know that we're both battling some stuff here, like congestion-wise, but it worked out so nicely. And I just appreciate your time and the effort that you put into being here.
It's truly, truly my honor, and you are amazing. You are just amazing, and the work you do, I'm happy to be a part of it, and to continue following the work that you do. Definitely a follower. And we'll be looking forward to the amazing work that you're gonna keep doing with this movement that you've started. And I'm really excited to see what's to come.
Thanks, and we're gonna do this again. I don't care. We're gonna do this again. We'll find a time.